This is Duke University.
Our next speaker will be Brian Castelli, and then after a break, we'll turn things over to Pat Garibay. Let me tell you a little bit about Brian real quick. Brian's had a lot of experience both in government, in his own consulting firm, in nonprofits, making the case for energy efficiency and bringing it to the world in lots of ways. So in the late 80s and early 90s, he worked for the State of Pennsylvania Energy Office, actually Commonwealth of Pennsylvania Energy Office. He was the executive director there, and from there he ran the state's energy policies and programs. He developed a revolving loan for investing in energy efficiency and a green buildings program that led the Commonwealth to look for energy efficiency gains within all the buildings that they operated. Then in the 90s, he was a presidential appointee in the Department of Energy, where he was the chief of staff for the Department of Energy's assistant secretary for energy efficiency. And from there, in the late 90s, he oversaw $1 billion worth of programs to try to find energy efficiency gains. In the early 2000s, Brian ran his own energy consulting firm. And since 2005, he's been at the Alliance for Saving Energy, ASE. All of this, I think, allows him to have a big picture of both the nonprofit side, the government side, and the business side. He has degrees in chemical engineering and an MBA, so he knows both sides of the equation. And with that, let me turn things over to Brian, who's going to talk to us about pathways to energy efficiency. So please welcome Brian.
Thanks a lot. I really do appreciate the nice intro. My mother was here, she'd really be happy with me, I'll tell you that. So, anyways, and I've talked to both Dan and Rick, and one of the things they want me to tell you is, we want this to be an open discussion. I'm going to have PowerPoints up there, but you guys ask questions, interrupt me, please, because it'll be a lot more valuable to all of you than if I just sit up here and tell you all these things. So, anyways, let's go from there. I will tell you a little bit about the Alliance. Actually, I want to say, Rick, you really did a lot to kind of set the stage, and you talked about so many things that could be such a full, rich discussion in and of their own that we could spend 3 or 4 hours on just one item, because there's a great depth to all this. And I liked your analogy about the miles per gallon, that how much you gain from the low teens to the high teens or low 20s. But it's just like education of kids. You guys, really, you guys are going to learn more and more, and it's going to be more impactful as you go into this. So we need to think about education and workforce development, because that's why I'm really glad you guys are here. One of the things that we have, you can tell by the gray hair here, is that we have an aging workforce in energy, all energy, not even energy efficiency. What we need, we kind of missed a generation. I think it was a generation of greed, frankly. But whatever, we need this generation that's really showing a lot of interest in green, sustainability, efficiency, all the good things, and this all plays into the business community. Because what you're looking for are ways to not only be more efficient, but ways to cut costs, ways to make your product better, and ways to make the environment better. So I think the programs and everybody represented here, it just makes so much sense. The Alliance to Save Energy was begun in 1977, okay, right after the second oil embargo, which I'm sure was before any of you were born. But they were fun days back then, when you had to get gasoline only on odd days, or even days, depending on your license plate. But that sparked really the beginning of the energy efficiency industry. And the father of the energy efficiency industry is a guy from Lawrence Berkeley Lab. He was Enrico Fermi, the great nuclear scientist. Last graduate student, Art Rosenfeld. And Art made a change at the first oil embargo. He realized that energy efficiency was where the United States needed to be. And he started a program out at Berkeley, and it's grown into one of the best programs on energy efficiency. The scientists out there, and this is at Berkeley National Lab, not even UC Berkeley, but at Berkeley National Lab, and a lot of the great research has been done out there. We have 9 other multi-purpose labs in the United States where great research is done. Our organization was started in 1977 by 2 U.S. senators, Senator Charles Percy, a Republican, and Senator Hubert Humphrey, a Democrat. And they decided that America was headed in the wrong direction. And we proceeded to head in that direction for 30 years, as hard as we tried to change it. So they started. Ever since, we have been led, our board has been chaired by a U.S. senator. The current senator who leads it is Jean Shaheen from New Hampshire. We also have 170 corporate members. We're probably pushing 180 right now. And we always have a CEO of one of our companies be our co-chairman. And the current co-chairman is Peter Darby, the chairman of the board, CEO, and president of Pacific Gas and Electric Company, one of the largest utilities in the country. And I've got to tell you, these people take part in our meetings. They aren't just there for some honorary position. We had our board meeting yesterday in Washington, our 3rd board meeting of the year. Peter Darby chaired that meeting. He was there for the entire 7 hours. Okay? We had Senator Mark Warner, one of our newest co-chairs, at the meeting. So we get a really good representation of our board. We're bipartisan. We have members from both parties. We have the current chair of the Energy and Natural Resources Committee in the Senate. Senator Bingaman is one of our members, and he's also been our chair in the past. Senator Lisa Murkowski is a ranking Republican on that same committee in the chairman and in the Senate, and she's one of our members. So we have a lot that we can say to these people about where we think national policy should be. We also tell them where we think their state policy should be. They don't always listen to us, but then we expect that. And I guess I can just use this. Yeah. As I said, these are just some of the logos of our members, and I should point out another logo. I have this little laser thing here, and if you look over there, we have Ingersoll Rand and Train. They're one of our members, one of our longtime members. So that's why I'm very happy to be here, because we enjoy doing things with our members, and our members are very active with us as well. Our funding comes from the government, both at the federal and state level. Our members pay dues. We get funding from them, and we get funding from foundations. But our members even often ask us to do other things, and they pay for us to do those things. They join together with other companies, for example, to do national campaigns for energy efficiency. The Alliance does a lot of things. We are very active in advocating for energy efficiency policies, both at the state level as well as the federal level. We're very much involved in all the energy bills. We're very much involved in language to make sure that energy efficiency plays a part in the laws that this country eventually comes up with. When the climate bill will finally, someday, and I don't know when, but there'll be a climate bill, and we'll make sure that energy efficiency is in that bill as a major tenet. I mean, to be very honest with you, energy efficiency is the first thing you need to do. I'm going to talk about that. Before you put up wind turbines and before you put up solar panels, if you have one incandescent light bulb in your house or in your building and you're using a solar panel or a wind turbine, you made a mistake. You're wasting a valuable resource. Make sure that your energy efficiency is your first goal, and that's what we talk about a lot. Let me back here. Global energy market, tight supplies. Tight supplies in a lot of areas throughout the world, and you know, there's a cyclical thing. It goes up, it goes down. Tight supplies drive up prices. Tight supplies mean you want to have more efficiency, because as the prices go up, you want to be more competitive. It's a growing demand. We have both China and India. They're coming on. Brazil. Everybody wants what they've seen on television. They've seen a Western lifestyle, and they want what that entails, and that entails a lot of plug loads in their homes and in their offices. It entails vehicles. So we're seeing tremendous demands across the world right now. there's only so much capacity, whether we're talking about it from a global level or whether we're talking about it at your local utility. Your local utility has a great demand for electricity or gas. How are they going to provide more of that? Heightened geopolitical and investment risk, obviously. If the supplies of a certain fuel come from another country that's in an unstable part of the world, you can have problems. It can be used as a weapon. I personally think we have problems. You know, we always talked, and we even when the alliance was started 30-some years ago, we talked about, you know, oil supplies in the Middle East, and this was a problem. Really, that's not the problem as much as the fact that currently our oil supplies, our two biggest importers, where we import oil from, is Mexico and Canada. Okay? Now, they're our neighbors, friendly neighbors. But you know what? We have money flowing out of this country to both of those countries. And that outflow of money, of capital, is a problem because it's not being kept here in this country to be used for indigenous jobs and purchases of other things. So that's a problem, even of itself, even with friendly nations. So we have to think about that. Higher prices, of course, we talked about, and climate. Climate is a big one. There is a cliff ahead, and where we're headed is pretty unsustainable. Now, energy efficiency, energy use has a direct effect on global emissions. We all know that. I mean, clearly, energy is about 80-some% of all the global carbon dioxide emissions. Use and consumption and production of energy accounts for about 80-some% of all CO2 emissions. So it's energy is the problem. Energy is what we've got to get around somehow. Energy also has a direct effect on security. There's clearly a problem with security. We have oil is a fungible product, but it's a problem if someone wants to hold up their production. It impacts the world, it impacts us. Increasing our reliance on foreign sources of energy is a problem. Whether it's oil, whether it's natural gas, whether it's LPG, whatever fuel it is, it's a problem if it's coming from somewhere else because it's not ours, and it's going to have to. I mean, we've got a global problem. We've got a global supply chain, and finally, the economy. McKinsey says business as usual is going to waste more than $1.2 trillion between now and 2020 just on energy waste, and that doesn't even include transportation, just on the building and industrial sectors. So there's a big impact if we allow the current framework and the current infrastructure to continue without any change. Why energy efficiency and why now? This is why it's unsustainable. A 33%, whoops, let's go back here. A 33% increase over the next 20 years, okay? That's not sustainable. And if you notice, coal rises the most in absolute terms. So we have the dirtiest fuel rising the most, the one that's going to cause the most climate problems if we don't change our consumption and change the efficiency of the products and transportation that we use. We do a lot of work in Asia. I've done a lot of work in China, so I've kept this old slide because basically it still shows China as producing only 19% of the world's CO2 emissions. As many of you I'm sure know, they now equal or surpass this just about 7 months ago, the U.S. The U.S. here was about 21% of the world's emissions. China is now just a bit ahead of us. But I think what's really interesting and why I drew these circles is U.S. building sector, that's both commercial and residential buildings, produce 8% of the world's CO2 emissions. Japan and India together only produce 8%. We do have, I think, an imperative that we have to get better. We need to be better. We need to find ways to reduce that. Energy efficiency, cheapest, quickest, and cleanest way to get where we need to go. And that's just a fact. Every dollar that we've invested in the Energy Star program has produced $75 in energy cost savings and $15 investment in new energy technologies. That's important. In 2001, You may remember that California had a major electricity crisis, okay? Well, they were able to cut their peak electricity use by 10% in less than 1 year by instituting energy efficiency. They did 2 major campaigns, a Flex Your Power campaign, and then a really innovative one called the California 2020 plan, where if you reduced your energy efficiency, if you reduced your energy consumption 20%, your electricity consumption, then you got an additional 20% off of your bill, okay? Not only did you get a smaller bill because you had done 20% less in consumption, you then got a 20% plan. They did that with less than a year. They did that. And the effects stayed on for 3 or 4 years. So there was even an impact. It wasn't just, it just didn't end when all of a sudden they were able to get enough transmission for new electricity sources in. It stayed. Cleaner, Amory Lovins of Rocky Mountain Institute, coined the negawatts language. And energy efficiency doesn't produce an environmental footprint. I mean, you're just using less than you were before, but still producing the same amount of whatever it is you're producing. If it's light, you really don't care. I don't think any of you care how many watts those light bulbs above your head are using, as long as you can read what's in front of you. I don't think it matters to you. It certainly doesn't matter to me. I don't care how they do it. But let's use less energy where we can and still get the same output. That's what's important. It's the lumens per square foot that hit that desk that really matter. It's not the watts in the light bulb. So that's something we have to think about. And it's more secure. Again, energy efficiency is a homegrown resource. It's here. If it's going to be done, it's indigenous. You've got to do it here. You've got to have the workers that are here. You can't outsource this to another country. This is people changing things here. For the 450 scenario refers to 450 parts per million of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. That's kind of the goal that all the smart scientists have decided is where we should try to be with climate, with our climate program. We're at about 386 now, I think, 386 parts per million. I certainly hope 450 is correct. Some scientists are saying maybe 350 is the tipping point. We've already passed that. But even to get to 450, it's going to be very difficult. But you can see that in the World Energy Outlook for 2009, they're saying that if we're going to get to the 450, we're going to get to the 450, 52% of it's going to have to come from end-use efficiency. 5% is going to come from supply side. Okay, we'll get 5% better on the supply side. Renewables might get us 20%, but it's the efficiency part that's going to make the big difference. And that's why, again, we have to make sure that the policies and incentives are correct to get this market to move. So it's one of the many things that we work on. Energy efficiency, believe it or not, is America's greatest energy resource. If you look at all these fuels here, we do about 100 quads a year. We do about 100 quads a year total, 37 of petroleum, 24 of natural gas, and quads are quadrillion BTUs in this country. And it turns out that all of the energy efficiency that we put into place and that still exists today means we're saving about 52 quads of energy every year, each and every year. Now think about what that means. If Art Rosenfeld hadn't started back in 1973 telling this country it really needed to do energy efficiency and started to implement programs, we would need another 52 quads of energy every year. And we know already how fragile some of the supplies are and what that can do to price. So efficiency is clearly our biggest energy resource, but it's an invisible one. You can buy a barrel of oil, you can buy 1,000 cubic feet of natural gas, but you don't see energy efficiency. It's a piece that really is invisible. Lots of opportunity throughout the world to improve energy efficiency. In looking at energy intensity, 1,000 BTUs per dollar of GDP, you can actually see that North America is really one of the better places. what it shows you is Eastern Europe and the former Soviet Union, great opportunities. This is where opportunities are. The Middle East, huge opportunities. Central and South America, Asia. So these are places where we can find energy efficiency markets and markets that need to be transformed. Potential demand reduction, just let's look at the industrial energy efficiency side. And I think this is really interesting too. Again, McKinsey, in their report from 2007, they showed that, you know, we can, whoops, I gotta get this laser thing right here. We can, the 2020 base for demand is about 613 quads of energy, quadrillion BTUs of energy. Now, in the residential sector, we can save about 32, commercial 13. But look at this, industrial sector can save 42 to 61 quads per year, and this is important. This is a critical area because industry is what drives a lot of things. It drives jobs, it drives the economy, and it can drive lower demands. So we need, for energy, so we need to really work in this area. Represents 38% of the opportunity to reduce carbon. So that's what's really critical, and we have to think about that. The potential, again, I love taking this chart from McKinsey. This was part of their analysis of what it would take, what measures would be cost effective under a $50 per ton premium if we had a tax or a carbon tax, carbon cap and trade program. And all of these under $50, which are, you know, cut off right about there somewhere, are effective. Okay, they're still viable under a $50 tax scenario. Now, what's really interesting are all these. These are all profitable investments right now. They have negative marginal costs. You put in, and the green ones, these dark green, are energy efficiency measures, which you notice dominate all of this. In the industrial sector, you have combined heat and power being a huge contributor, something that ought to be done. The question is, why aren't these things done? If they're profitable today, if the investments are good, and they aren't going to cost you anything other than the first cost, why aren't they being done? And that's part of it. It is the first cost. Again, energy efficiency is the first fuel. The Union of Concerned Scientists and ACEEE came up with these numbers. It's about 2.5 cents per kilowatt hour to do energy efficiency. Wind's about 8, and this was 2009. Okay, biomass 12, natural gas, pulverized coal. Okay, that tends to be the cost, and this is at a $20 a ton carbon. Yeah, so efficiency again is your low hanging fruit. This is the one we ought to be going after. Still, why isn't it being done? Why is there resistance? Well, there are a lot of reasons why there's resistance. I mean, in the buildings side, one right here, and I know that Ingersoll Rand and Train are going to be talking about a building case, but here's one reason why we have issues in the commercial building sector. Split incentives. And you can have the same problem if you're renting an apartment, renting a home. If your rent includes your utility bill, in other words, you're just paying it as part of your rent, what incentive do you have to reduce your energy consumption? You don't care, because you're getting a flat rate from your landlord. Your landlord's not going to be making the effort to reduce your energy costs, to make the building more energy efficient, because he's just going to charge it in your rent, and you're paying for it. So he doesn't have an incentive. These are the kind of things we have to get over. There are a lot of other things. I mean, having energy subsidies, you know, in particularly energy subsidies for the fossil fuel industry. I mean, it always has amazed me that the oil industry, after all these years, first they have a depletion allowance, okay, depleting their valuable reserves, okay. Well, you know, I've always advocated for, let's have a depletion allowance for solar. After all, we know someday the sun's going to be used up, right? it doesn't get very far in Congress, but at least it makes them think a little bit as to how ludicrous it is for what they're doing. The other thing I love about the oil industry is they get something called the IDC, okay? Intangible drilling cost deduction from their taxes. Intangible drilling costs. Think about those first two words. I mean, intangible drilling. Okay, what does that mean? It means they get to make up a number, okay? And it becomes part of their IRS report, and they get a deduction. They're intangible costs. Can't really define them, you know? But they get a subsidy, okay? Uncertain costs. This is a real problem. You know, I just looked today online here. On my phone, I get a report every day of what all the different fuel prices are, and oil was back up to $83 a barrel. Last Wednesday, this time, it was $72 a barrel. Well, uncertain costs are a problem. If the costs are rising, energy efficiency makes a lot more sense. But if you're doing a big energy efficiency project, and the cost of oil goes down to $60 a barrel or $50 a barrel, it doesn't look so good anymore, okay? So uncertain costs is a problem. All these are barriers that we have to come over. Information, you know? How do we inform the public as to what really makes sense? How do we get the public, how do we get the facility manager to know that it's important for him to run his building more efficiently when all he ever hears is, hey, I'm not comfortable in my office. I want you to get the temperature correct. I don't care whether it's too warm or too cold. But he's getting graded as to how he handles the complaints, not how he's getting, not his performance isn't based on how effectively he runs the building. So we have to get over all of these things. In industrial systems efficiency, industrial firms tend to invest in process changes for energy efficiency and productivity for the long term, but it's generally a high cost. Also, industrial firms hate to change their process, hate to shut down a product line because it takes revenue out of their product, out of their pocket. That's a problem, but it's something that they have to figure out. How do they amortize this over time? What are the savings, and how quickly can they be achieved? Cross-cutting energy systems, motor-driven, steam, process heating, offer huge savings potential. Inefficient systems are found in almost every plant. I mean, I'm an engineer. I certainly know that, and I was an engineer in the oil industry, we were taught to over-design refinery columns, okay? Because the last thing you want to do was build a refinery and then find out you didn't have a pipe in those miles of pipes that was big enough to take the flow you were supposed to. So we were taught to over-design. Well, that's not smart. I mean, people buy motors that are 3 times the size they need just to make sure they have enough motor to turning pump, okay? Not smart. If you buy a 150 horsepower motor and all you need is 50, you're using a lot more electricity and more inefficiently than even if you bought one that had a variable speed drive. So there are a lot of technologies that have come into effect that are commercial that could be used, but these are the kind of problems that we've had in getting these things done. We always recommend customizing the system energy efficiency for each site. There's no particular, cookie cutter model. And the U.S. Department of Energy strategy since 1992 is let's follow best practices. Let's educate plant engineers. Tell them what the best practices have been in other companies with similar situations and that they should adopt those. Industry partnerships have been great between the public sector and the private sector. And finally, cost-shared plant energy assessments. Getting the energy assessments of a plant done. That's often a barrier in and of itself because it's costly to have somebody come in and audit that facility. Okay? So cost sharing between the government, state government or federal government, and the plant is important. DOE has a program now called Save Energy Now. They have a goal of a 25% reduction in industrial energy intensity by 2017. That would save 8.4 quads each year in the US. And that amount of energy is equal to all that's consumed by California. So there's a big target out there. And this is what we have to get to. Now, buildings. Buildings consume 39% of all the energy in the US, 72% of electricity, and it accounts for 38% of our carbon emissions. Buildings are an issue, and we saw that in that first slide, 8% worldwide, okay? The Energy Information Administration projects that building-related CO2 emissions are going to increase by 270 million tons by 2030. Okay, it's huge. I mean, forget the numbers. It's huge. This is a problem. How do we get better buildings? Okay, we get better buildings through a lot of ways. The United States Green Building Council has a LEED system, Leadership in Energy and Environmental Design, that scores buildings, that makes a building more prestigious than another building, but it makes them more efficient and it makes them more sustainable. It's a better building. That's one way. Building codes. Now there's something that's really boring. If you want to get into a boring part of the world, you go into building codes or appliance standards. And I'm sorry, but these are two areas where you've really got to get deep into to really make changes, and the changes entice great battles over just the smallest little items. A lot of fun. But it's important because building codes and appliance standards are two of the areas where we've made the most progress over the last 30 years, that have saved the most energy and continue to save energy. The more you increase the efficiency in building energy codes, the better the next building is that's going to be built. And the great story is, every 3 years, the building energy codes are improved. Okay? And over the first 20-some years, if we got a 1 to 1.5% improvement every 3 years in the building energy code, it was great. 2 years ago, we decided to break that mold. We went for a 30% increase in the building code. 30% increase in the energy efficiency in the building code. And we fought long and hard battles with the industry for over a year. Culminated, we ended up with a 16% increase in energy efficiency. Wasn't 30%, but it wasn't bad. Well, we're back at it. At the end of this month, we're back for the 2012 code cycle, and we're going for 30% plus. It's the 30% plus, and we are moving hard. We've now brought the National Association of Home Builders under the tent, and they're looking at up to 26% increase. Okay? That was from 0. Yeah, please, I'm sorry, I didn't see your hand.
No, I just raised it. So you mentioned 30%. How did you decide on 30%? And you got 16%, and now you're trying for 30%. Shouldn't you try for 40% and try to get 30%? Or how are you deciding on the percentages?
We're looking at what's technologically feasible and what we can really do. And plus, again, I should say this about the Alliance to Save Energy. We're very unique in that we're an alliance. We're not an association. All over Washington there's an association. There's an association, for lawyers. There's an association for accountants. Right? We're an alliance for all the different industries involved in energy efficiency. So we're not an association. We don't look for the lowest common denominators when we create a policy, and we look at what's best for the country. And our alliances also includes the National Resources Defense Council, Union of Concerned Scientists, environmental groups, as well as all of our corporate global leaders, and many of them are Fortune 100 companies. So we try to bring the two together to a point where we can say, okay, we've pushed the envelope as far as we can on the environmental side. At the same time, we've pushed it as far as we can for the industries. So everybody gets something. Nobody gets everything. So our goal of 30% was really a wild shot when we first took it. But when we got 16%, we said, you know what, let's go back and get 30 or 30 plus. And we looked at the ways we can modify the codes to get that kind of improvement. And it's really negotiation at levels you would not believe, and it's voting. These are done in a setting where people vote for these things. So you've got a lot of convincing to do. You've got to get the right people together. So that's something the Alliance does, and we do it with a lot of partners. I'm not saying we do this alone. We have a lot of other groups that we work with, but we do, because of our structure, we fit in a certain place that's really enabled us to do this. So that's just something that we just, and we actually run the Department of Energy. It's called the Building Code Assistance Program. Now, you can get these codes improved, and it becomes the model code for the country. Okay? Then states have to adopt it. So the Building Code Assistance Program that we run has people that go out throughout the states to get them to adopt the code. Great. State adopts the code, that's wonderful. Leaves out one piece: compliance. Okay? Now, what's the use of having a great code if you have no enforcement of the code, if you have no compliance with the code, that's a problem. We saw it after Katrina. Went down about a year after the flood, and we looked at some, and interestingly enough, I mean, the New Orleans government adopted the Model Energy Code, the 2006 Model Energy Code, and that was great. We saw some new homes that were being built. First thing we saw were some of the homes still had brand new windows with the window labels on them. Weren't even close to the 2006 code, okay? Then we looked and we saw the heating and cooling systems, nowhere close to what the 2006 Energy Code requires, okay? Why was that? Because New Orleans had lost half of its population at the time. They had no compliance officers. So what did the builders do? They went back to what they knew. They just bought the stuff that they could get hold of, and they didn't care about whether it met the standards, the code or not. So enforcement's a big part. We've now got foundation support funding to supplement our building code assistance program to go out and help train compliance officers in the states. So that's an important aspect. So there's a lot of mechanics to get this all done, and we work at all the levels. So it's just a very, for me, I find it very interesting. I wouldn't want to deal in codes myself, and I've always passed that off to somebody else who really likes it. But I think it's important. And the thing is, this is the sad part. Codes only apply to new buildings. Now, we have 129 million buildings in the United States. How many buildings were we building even at the peak 3 years ago? 2 to 3 million? So you're getting less than 3%. The critical element is to figure out a way to get codes to apply to existing buildings. Now you could do that by having them apply to major renovations. And that would be a really interesting thing to get done, something we're trying to push through. But this now breaks into a whole new area of applying a code for new buildings to existing buildings. But that would help drive the whole market. And the more you drive the market, the more the products are available, and the more they become more less costly. So it's important to do these things. So we're looking at all kind of ways to change the game. We're at a point now where we need to change the game, and that's what we're starting with. And I like this thermometer slide. Currently, you know, the existing commercial buildings, they're at about 90,000 BTUs per square foot per year. Oh, I'm sorry. Question?
I'm sorry.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, I keep looking that side.
To your point about existing buildings, are you looking at point of sale energy labeling as a way to do that?
We think that's a great way to do it. Big opposition from the National Association of Realtors. Now why? I would see that as an opportunity. If I were a realtor, I would say, oh, this is a great opportunity. I can sell a labeled building and it's going to be worth more. No, NAR has seen it as, it's one more thing we have to deal with that we didn't have to deal with before, and we're having a bad enough time now in this economy, so why do we want to do it? It's truly amazing to me. But yes, point of sale is a great way. I mean, and you know, it's in California, it's being done in Berkeley. Berkeley has this program where they want to have, yeah, of course, I know, it's a California solution. Yeah, we all know. Can't talk about the left coast because everybody else, right. But California's experimenting with it, Berkeley's experimenting with it. There's a PACE program which is starting to tie in, it's called PACE, public, oh geez, I'm sorry, I forget what it stands for, but what it is using the property taxes, property assessed efficiency, yeah. And they're using the property taxes to pay for the efficiency, and then it's in your property tax bill. So if you're a homeowner and you put $20,000 into doing a complete retrofit of your home, you don't have a consumer loan to worry about when you leave the home three years from now when you leave. It becomes part of the property tax base of the next homeowner. You've paid a little more in your property taxes, but you're not stuck with a $20,000, $30,000 loan. So that's a great way. And there are a couple communities. Boulder is doing it in Colorado. It's being done in California. It's being done up in New York State as well, starting. But it's a problem because, again, It's not a national program, it's not even statewide, it's community-based. Much harder to make it a big program from community-based. But these things are being looked at, they're being studied, and we'll see what the results are. I'll be very honest with you, right now the results, it's really too early to tell. But that's a great way. Thank you for bringing that up. Anyways, this is what commercial buildings look like. And if we had all the buildings rebuilt to the existing, this was the 2006 code, they'd be at the 70,000 BTUs per square foot. If we looked at the best available technologies, those that are commercially available today, we could be at the 40,000 BTU per square foot load. And then, you're never gonna get with efficiency only to a net zero energy building. You're gonna need on-site renewables if you wanna get there. So, but we have at least an idea of what it's going to take and where it is. So we know this is a big road that we have to get down, and it's gonna take some time, but we've got to do it quickly because we are, frankly, running out of time to address the problems we have. The business benefits, I stole a bunch of slides from my buddies at USGBC, but for the businesses doing a commercial building energy efficiency program, you can drop energy use by 30 to 50%, carbon emissions by 35%. Water use, and this is a big area, and we don't think about it a lot. The Alliance created a program 15 years ago called WaterG, which is the link between energy and water. And we work with municipal water companies throughout the world, and we reduce the energy use associated with water. And that's a huge use. Every liter of water that's pumped through a pipe has an energy component to it. So if you've got a leaky system, you may be pumping 100 million liters of water, and if you're losing 20% of that water, you've still got the energy use of 100 million liters. You're not delivering it to your consumer, but you're having to do it. That's a whole nother story. That's another lecture for another day. But I will show you one case study that we did. And solid waste can be improved 70%. So what we want to do is, if you look at this, the average expected decrease in operating costs can be 8 to 9%. If you're a building owner, if you're a Jones Lang LaSalle, which owns lots of buildings, or if you're an insurance company that has invested heavily into green buildings, you're going to want to know this. Energy use, again, 30%. Building value, here is where you really have to look. If I build a green building, is it going to increase the value of my building? Because, 3 years ago, everybody dealt in buildings to flip them. You bought them, you sold them. Nobody was keeping. Okay, there were a few companies, Manulife out of Canada, kept buildings. They built a building, they kept it. It was in their portfolio. But there weren't many companies. So what's the value increase? Okay, well, it can be 7.5%. The operating income can be increased by 6.6% because you get increased occupancy and you get a rent increase. And this is important. If you can charge a higher rent because your building is green, then you've got a better building. It's more valuable. It's more valuable to the next person who buys it as well. And this is what they're documenting through studies. This case study is pretty good. It's Adobe Systems. It was an existing building. They spent $1.4 million and they did 64 separate efficiency projects. They got $389,000 in rebates from the state and the federal government. They got $1.2 million in annual savings. They had a 10-month payback. That's good no matter how you look at it. Okay, your corporation may say, I want a 22, 23% ROI or an ROE, but what you really want is 10-month payback. And these are the kind of projects that exist out there. Okay, 121% ROI. So these exist. Existing buildings can be valuable buildings, and they can help the company itself. Municipal energy efficiency challenges, water systems, aging infrastructure throughout this country, leaky distribution systems, okay, and clearly system inefficiencies, pumps and motors. And this is all over the world. Anywhere you have a municipal water system, you can bet it's inefficient, okay, and you can bet it can be improved quickly. Other parts of the municipal infrastructure are inefficient buildings, the houses, government offices, schools, okay, all of this, hospitals, call it the mush market. Municipal buildings, schools and hospitals. It's just an important area. It's big. Lack of energy and water metering. I mean, I represented the California Energy Commission between 2000 and 2004 in Washington, D.C. A friend of mine, a lobbyist, called me up one day and said, hey, can you help me out? I've got a metering company that's my client, and they'd like to meter water in Sacramento. I said to him, what do you mean meter water in Sacramento? They must meter water. He said, no, they don't. Okay? So Californians who have major water issues in Sacramento didn't have water meters because they have two rivers that run there, the American and the Sacramento. So they didn't need to meter water because they don't have a water problem. Maybe the rest of the state does, but up there they didn't. So the residents in Sacramento had no reason to conserve or to be efficient about their water use because they weren't being charged for it. It didn't matter. This reminds me of all the time that I spent during the Clinton administration in the former Soviet Union, Russia and Ukraine particularly. It was the same with energy there. Residences didn't pay for energy, okay? Didn't matter how much they used. They didn't pay for it, and they just used it. So you have these kind of issues which are really a problem. You even have them here in the U.S. and in California, which is of course our leading state in efficiency for everything. So you got to watch these things. Yeah.
I'm just curious, in one of your previous slides, you showed kind of an overall, it's way back.
Oh, way back. Okay.
You basically broke down regions in the world and showed where there was greater potential for energy abatement.
Right.
And U.S. was low down the line, so it's interesting you're going through the U.S. and all of this potential for saving energy, but really Russia and the Middle East have greater potential for energy savings. Why?
Particularly for GDP. This is based on dollars of GDP. So you have a lot of gross domestic product in the U.S., Mexico, Canada. All right, very high levels of GDP compared to some of these other countries. So intensity is always something you have to understand. What is the denominator and what's the numerator? You have to understand that. I mean, and that's clearly an issue when you talk about intensity, because everybody likes to talk about energy intensity, but what are the measures? So this can look somewhat skewed because we often don't think of the U.S. as an energy efficient country to begin with, much less the rest of North America. But in terms of energy use per $1 of gross domestic product, we look pretty good. So the potential still exists. And as these areas, Asia and others, become more and more, produce more and more product, then we're going to see these change. So that's just, I think, one of the really interesting aspects of all this. Let me get back to where we were. That's scary. Here's a good case study. We did this in Fortaleza, Brazil, and it's in the very arid northeastern part. This was a municipal water system. Households weren't connected to service, okay? The efficiencies include pumps, operations, and maintenance, system management. Utility couldn't afford the energy costs. It's a municipal utility. We looked at automated controls on pressure and pumping, improved data collection analysis, and improved motor efficiency, okay? We saved 88 million kilowatt hours in 4 years, while the municipality added 88,000 new customers using the same amount of water as before. So they didn't have to buy any more water or provide any more water than what they had in the system before. But by reducing the leaks, improving the system distribution, they could add 88,000 more customers. They saved $2.5 million every year, and their investment was only $1.1 million. Payback 7 months. We find this all over the world. What does it take to deploy energy efficiency at scale? Well, you've got to have everything from research and development to the right incentives. People need incentives to get over those barriers we talked about. Education and outreach so that the customers understand what's important. And finally, codes and standards that lock in savings for consumers and businesses. And when we say lock in, if you build a building to code, you're locked in for 100 years, maybe 50 years, depending how long your building's going to be there. But if you build an inefficient building, you've got it for as long as that building has a life. That life's 50 years, it's going to be 50 years of an inefficient building. It's why you want to keep improving those codes as often as you can. Why you want standards. Same with appliance standards. The more efficient the appliance is, the more efficient appliances will be sold, and you won't have inefficient ones in the market. You'll replace them with more efficient ones. Policy, creating the incentives is really critical. Opening the energy sector to private participation is critical in many countries throughout the world. Sometimes they even talk about it here. It's interesting. Promote metering and demand-side management measures, very important. Eliminating subsidies, modernizing energy standards and technical regulations, and promoting the energy efficiency service markets. And we're going to talk more about that in the next speaker. Strategies for efficiency deployment. You have to have capacity and awareness, strengthen the national agencies. You got to have energy efficiency targets. If you don't have a target and you aren't able to measure it, you're never going to manage it. And that's really kind of the basic. You know, this is energy efficiency 101. That's where it starts. Training energy managers and auditors are really critical. Making sure they're doing the right thing, making sure they understand what it is they should be doing to manage the building or manage the industrial process. Cultivating partnerships among everybody, consumers, providers, financiers, really important. Providing information on what are the EE models, what are the best practices, documenting the case studies, all of that's critical. And financing, there's all kind of ways. There's loan funds, there's vendor credits, there's leasing, credit guarantees, and carbon finance, yeah.
How many banks do you have as part of your alliance? And I guess
We have two.
I guess what I'm getting at is, you know, you showed earlier like 121% ROI. I would think banks would want to jump all over that kind of return.
You would think that. But financiers, I mean, and you know, we'll have some people here who find it hard to get the financing. There's a lot of information and education that has to be done. One program, let me just quickly, before I get to your question, one program we just finished about 6 months ago in Ukraine. We went in to help the indigenous ESCO industry work with the banks so that the banks would understand what it was they were doing. And we had to train the bank loan officers why energy efficiency was a profitable investment. We're at that basic level still. And it's worked. We did 10 investment grade audits. At the last I've heard from Alex, who was over there, was we have 3 that have been financed now by local banks in Ukraine, banking local projects by indigenous ESCOs there. So it's a process. Yeah, your question?
That actually goes along with the question I had, and you don't have to go back to the slide or to your discussion, but one of the things that we've seen in some of the classes we've taken is that exact problem of there's the opportunity out there, but people don't really know how to capitalize on it because they can't define the return on investment, and they can't really define those, and they're really fuzzy. So you said 7.5%. I remember it somewhere where if you have an established home and you can, you know, it improves your overall worth of your home, but that's one of the biggest problems with these existing buildings. How do you figure that out? Who assesses that? And that goes back to what Emily's comment was before. Who are you getting to? Are you guys working and creating a policy on that side of it, or training documents for people on that side of it?
Answering the question of where's the documentation for what the added value is to these measures is really an important part. And USGBC and Carnegie Mellon University, Vivian Lofness and Volker Hartkopf, have been doing a meta-analysis of buildings and studies that are showing really what the increased value is if you have these measures and what it does to their value when they're sold or when they're transferred or whatever. So that's the kind of stuff that we're really looking for. No longer anecdotal, one-off evidence, but long-term, you know, reliable studies that are done so that we can see, and then we can use those to show the banks. And this has been an ongoing process. Whoops. Oh, you know what? We have a sneaky thing back here. Ha! You didn't tell me about this button, did you? Oh, that's where we... Anyways, as you can tell, I'm almost done. So let me just get here. Anyway, so the financing mechanisms are important. Shore Bank, which, you know, of Chicago, which was just bought out by the bank because it's had a problem in this economic downturn, was one of the leading, financiers of projects and programs. And they've run into problems because this is an area that's still, it's not fully documented as to what happens. It's pretty obvious, intuitively obvious, but it's not happening. Anyways, why is it all important? We do only have one world. I mean, this is just an old satellite photo of where we've lost 20% of the polar ice cap from where it was in '79. And every day there's another story of ice caps breaking off, of big pieces of our Earth changing. And we only have one world. And if we screw it up, we may not get a chance to repair it. And that's, I think, what the real fear has to be. I have a good friend good colleague who runs the most popular blog on climate change, works for CAP, Joe Rome, and you go on his blog, it's just tremendous, right? And I often kid him about CCID. I said, I've got CCID, climate change induced depression. I'm telling you, this is what you gotta watch out for, because we can still change it. You can still change it. That's why I hope you're here. You can make those changes. And that's really all that I have, using either one of these buttons. So thank you. And I don't know if we have any time or if we want to
Let's grab one question, then we'll take a break. Who wants to throw out that one question?
Only really good questions.
Yeah, the question's always good.
Any question is a really good question, trust me.
I'll ask a question.
Sure.
Just to keep everybody here a little longer. So,
Why break?
Exactly. A lot of states have that renewable energy portfolio.
Sure.
What is your feeling on that? Is that going to help in the energy efficiency, bringing those changes to bear?
On a statewide basis, a renewable energy portfolio standard is very important and very good. Federally, it's very tough to get a high enough renewable energy portfolio standard that wouldn't be lower than some of the states. And we have tried to get an EARS, an energy efficiency or an EAPS, energy efficiency portfolio standard, which would also require the states to increase the amount of energy efficiency that's done every year. The current RPS bill that's in Congress allows for up to 25% of the RPS to be for energy efficiency, so states have a choice. But the level is, we're glad it's there. We're glad it's part of one of the last remaining bills that are left on energy, but it's too low for both. And that's, I think we're kind of on the political side, it makes it very difficult.
Okay. Thank you again, Brian.
Produced by Duke University. Online at duke.edu.